Welcome to this little video on the single leg squat. What I wanted to do is look at this kind of quite common test that we see that kind of is used to measure physical function, unilateral limb load. I think it's important for performance and being able to control and generate power in a single leg. Especially after injury, it's very important during the rehab process that we use unilateral limb loading. I think it's very important that we kind of get over any of those protective situations that people tend to have and restore full function on a single leg. If we have used two legs, what we often see is that someone might favour the leg that they prefer to use. So what we might look at is kind of three aspects. One would be increasing proprioception, so moving the joint through different positions in space, so that we use our proprioceptive ability for things like our motor control. Also, it's important that we have good, feed forward, feedback situations going on. I think both delayed and increased muscular activity will have their roots in kind of some of the changes in proprioception that we might see. Our joint feedback and our muscular feedback is very, very important for our feed forward stuff, and I certainly think we see changes to that after pain. So we're going to look at proprioception. We're going to look at movement, how we can actually, move around on a single leg, and we have movement control, both in terms of increasing movement and movement control, and sometimes creating more accurate movement control and bringing sometimes those large kind of those large movements we see associated maybe with delayed muscular activation and things like that, and higher variability, bringing them back with more normal variability parameters, and also limb loading as well. So we know that strength is important. We know that loading a limb and load toleration are good for pain, not just in terms of rehabilitation for pain, but toleration for future action and more robustness. So first of all, we might want to look simply how we could, assess using a single leg. So one of my tests is simply get someone to stand on a leg that maybe doesn't seem to be so problematic. It could be knee, ankle, hip, lower back injuries that we might see. And what I might do is get the hands, and I'm going to hold the hands and then get someone to simply squat down and see how well they actually go and load their hip, their knee and their ankle. Am I seeing similar movement and a spread of load between all the joints? Am I seeing smooth movement? Am I seeing kind of a drop? Am I seeing movement more laterally and medially? And the other most important thing is kind of the factors that aren't to do with movement. So how comfortable does someone seem just simply standing on that single leg? Are we seeing kind of apprehension? Are we seeing stiffening? Are we seeing changes in breathing, such as holding the breath, reddening, sympathetic nervous system stuff? Just simply, are people happy to move on that single leg? So kinesiophobia is very, very common after lots of injuries. It's been quite well studied in things like ACLs. And it's important that someone's happy to move on a single leg. And some of this is about instilling confidence and skill and load toleration back into being able to move on a single leg. If we look at cutting, running, jumping, all these things are very, very dependent on single leg and single leg loading as well. So we're thinking about kind of more of the cognitive factors, and then we're also thinking about the physical, physiological factors as well. So I might take someone's hand and just simply get them to move through the movement. Now, a case example was someone I saw the other day, been to see multiple physical therapists, had a couple of knee operations and consistently kept getting this kind of knee pain, knee tightness problems when she was sitting and then going to standing, very common stuff, but it had been ongoing over a number of years without kind of success. And one of the things that I found when she was on a single leg is when she went down on her side, held her hands, got her to go down on an uninjured leg or an unpainful leg. I'm sure there were some sensitivity issues going on. And she went down very well, controlled it very nicely. When we went on to the affected limb, what I started to see was instantly we saw tightening, we saw kind of apprehension, whether you call that fear avoidance, I don't know whether you could call it that. Held the hands, and what I see instantly before she even went down, there was almost like a collapse, a drop. There wasn't that eccentric, kind of nice eccentric control you might see from a healthy neuromuscular system. And what I saw was as she went down, she actually twisted her hip. So we saw that kind of knee movement, but I feel it was being driven from the hip because she didn't actually want to go down and put her entire load through the left leg or the right leg, I can't remember. And she kind of did a twisting motion instead. And she turned that kind of vertical load into a little bit of a kind of medial twist, if you like. And I think that was definitely to try and avoid getting into loading that leg. And kind of when we stopped her from being able to get away from that, which had become a predominant protective pattern, what we found was, you know, her ability to control that was actually quite poor. Now, so I held her hands, and what I tried to do is offset how much load she put through it by using the other leg. And then actually I used this leg to creep round so that she wasn't able to provide a twisting motion. And so we got a little bit more of a load. If you see, if I bring this leg round, it actually stops me from driving more medially. So again, it changed her kind of predominant movement pattern. Now, I don't know what's right, I don't know what's wrong. All I know is that if you do something continuously, I'd like to see how well you do something else, and then see what effect that has on your kind of physical capability. So, you know, what we did was we got her to turn her pelvis, which stopped her turning the pelvis the other way, and then just coming down and just doing some small knee bends, loading up that leg. So it's very important we look at multiple kind of physical qualities, you know. Even when we get into the single leg squat, we might want to look at rate of force development, we might want to look at eccentric load only, you know, all these factors, but that might be a little bit further down the line. Straight away, what I might want to do is just derive some kind of information and some different proprioceptive information. We have to remember, if we think about you know, some of those kind of encoding issues we might get, providing different feedback and different feed forward might create, you know, changes within discomfort output, within muscular output, pain output, all these other factors. So, you know, we provide different input, we might get a different output. We tend to, you know, break habits, movement habits, and hopefully we can see some change as well as changes then in load toleration. So instantly, what we might do is offset the load on this single leg. You can provide feedback through holding the hand. And then all I got her to do was just simply move forward and move back with the weight predominantly on the single limb. So we just go into more of an extended position, and we just go into more of a flex position. We might go into more of an adducted position, we might go into more of an abducted position. Now, if we think about things like ACL, knee problems, where we see that kind of valgus collapse, where we see adduction of the femur, you know, if we're more able to move into an abducted position at the hip, then we're probably less likely to see a movement of the femur into adduction. Now, what we have to remember is that often we're trying to create abduction like that, where we create active abduction, but sometimes we might also need to create abduction driven a little bit more by the pelvis. So you think about a change of direction, my leg isn't actually going outwards because it's stuck on the floor. What we actually see is actual relaxation, an eccentric relaxation of the area to allow me to move into a different position and shift my weight over to the other side. If I can't get that abduction as I move laterally, you're going to start to see that femur go into more of an adducted position. Again, we see that interaction of the neurological and the physical biomechanical, if you like. If we haven't got the required movement skill in the hip, the ability to choose the right amount of physical tension, what we might then see is a biomechanical change that we pick up, you know, whether that be in running analysis or movement cutting analysis, etc. So we might have to look at the movement ability of the segment. So if you're thinking about the single leg squat, again, offload, and we can just move into these different kinematic positions, just trying to provide smooth, controlled movement and accurate movement. You know, accuracy is the most important thing, because accuracy provides, you know, the intended feedback and feed forward, and then the cerebellum mixes them up and kind of sees if they match, and against the intended versus the reported, the kind of the forward model of motor controls, and we might see from people like Wolpert. And it's very important that we can just start to get people to move through those different movements at the hip. It might be we want to emphasize those movements at the ankle. One of the wonderful things about the single leg squat is it's an integrated movement, and that when we see injuries to one part of the leg, such as the ankle or such as the hip, we tend to see changes in the kinematics of other parts of the leg. And that makes complete sense, because the body's a system, and it can use different movement strategies to kind of create what it might see as a functional situation to occur. And we might call that adaptive, but essentially adaptive can always become maladaptive somewhere else down the line. So again, if we might also get issues where we get deconditioned tissue, we're not loading it, it becomes more sensitized, etc., etc. So it's important we can move through these movements. It could be that I also move my femur or move my ankle. Again, we're driving, seeing how good your movement skills might be, pelvis on femur, and then also femur on pelvis as well, that ability to dissociate different body segments. And I would regard that as good capacity. If we had good capacity, we can run many, many movement specifics. We might transition that into a simple circle. How well can we control that simple circle? If you really wanted, you could take the leg behind and drive an open chain circle. People do things like this at the shoulder with laser pens, which give you great feedback, but essentially it's the same. It's providing proprioceptive information that the brain can then process and output. So what we might also want to do is then close our eyes, because again, you're going to create more proprioception or more bias of the proprioceptive system. What you might also want to do is guide someone round to let them know how to move, and then see how well they can recreate it, A, on their own, and then B, on their own with their eyes closed. And again, what we're trying to find out is a little bit more, how good is that neuromuscular system? And again, I think anecdotally, we tend to find people in pain, or even in some research, we've found that people in pain have worse proprioception, worse limb sense, and people after pain as well. So we have that proprioception kind of thing, and then we might move into a movement. So what we now want to do is think about how well someone can actually decelerate and accelerate that movement. So it might be that I could just touch forward and touch back, and all I'm doing is creating different loading and asking the neuromuscular system to decelerate different movement positions and allow me to be able to do that in a smooth and controlled fashion. I don't really believe in motor control, much more believe in motor abundance. Wonderful paper called The Bliss of Motor Abundance by Mark Latash. Really interesting paper for me, because we're starting to think about movement control as, you know, being not controlling, but there's lots of abundance, degrees of freedom that we can use. There's lots of what's called motor redundancy, and we can use that redundancy rather than trying to reduce it into this one perfect movement that we generally can't define anyway. So I could touch forward and touch back. So what I'm trying to do is offset the need for stability, because that's an added demand. I can, you know, I'm providing stability with a toe touch, and then what I might do is get someone to stand on a single leg and actually move through, being able to control that movement. Again, seeing how well they can move into a kind of a more medially driven position, how well they can move out into a more laterally driven position. As they move forward, do we see extension from the hip coupled with ankle dorsiflexion? Are they able to reach back again, create ankle dorsiflexion? Hip flexion? Have they got the capacity and the ability to be able to do that? Especially with return to play in sports, we really, really need all that variety and capacity that someone can use. We need to couple that also with the skill of being able to do that on a single leg. We can add speed in, we could add load in, we could add reactivity where someone's actually telling me where to go. Say, I might say, reach forward, reach medial, reach lateral, reach left, reach right, reach posterior behind you. And someone's ability to be able to react to that and then control that in a smooth manner shows, you know, that healthy functioning neuromuscular system. And that's all we can kind of do when we're thinking about movement. You know, sometimes even if you have the most healthy functioning neuromuscular system, you might still have pain. So it's very, very hard to just always equate movement and pain. But I think, you know, it's fairly good to be able to say, if we have good movement capacity, you can probably go out and play sport again. You know, I think that's a fairly, well, that's all you can really say, you know. So finally, we want to look at load toleration. So again, how can we offset load toleration? So it might be that the first thing we get someone to do is toe touch and hold their hands and go down into a kind of a mini squat and make sure that they're fully loading the hip. And what you might want to do if they're creating some kind of movement to move away from loading is you can use the body and use your position where you stand to offset that. So as I said before, the woman that I had last week, she was in a position whereby she kept rotating her pelvis. So if I rotate the pelvis the other way, she's not going to be able to do that. She's forced to load into a position she doesn't really like to do. So again, you know, if we do that in a graded way, we're going to create a really quality load into the hip. And that's very important for deconditioned tissue. It's very important for load toleration. Again, it's about changing and adapting movement according to someone rather than just applying a movement to someone and they do it in whatever way that they want to do it. So she might have been able to do a whole load of single leg squats that would have never changed her ability to move on a single leg. She'd have just done the same movement that she did before. So we can then move away, so we're not holding. We can then just do a toe touch. And again, we can change depth as well of the squat. Providing more depth is going to, create larger limb load. We then might want to move on to going onto a single leg, but maybe holding on to someone or holding on to something. And again, coming down and actually loading through that single leg again. If I'm seeing someone twist and move that way, if you come over there, you can hold hands, still standing on a single leg, and come down, provide that stability and load in a different way. It might be you don't need to be extremely over here, you can just be over here. We could use things like TRX to provide some stability. Then we might want to move into just a single leg load where we come down and all we're doing is just loading the single limb, but all of our mass pretty much is acting on this hip, or most of our mass, probably about 4/6 of it. I think a leg is about 1/6 of our mass, as I recall, and that would be on the ground. Maybe it's 5/6, 4/6, can't remember. So we could do that. Could we add load to it? Yes. Could we add speed to it? Yes. And then what we might want to start to do is be able to add load and speed together. So we have load, speed and position, and that might be where we get to in terms of sport. One of the other things you have to think about is that multi-dimensional movement as well, simply because we know that most knee injuries don't happen linearly. If we're talking about catastrophic stuff such as ACLs, very rarely happen in a linear fashion, nearly always happen twisting, turning on a single leg. So it's important we can reflect some of that in our movement as well, that kind of knee, shallow knee flexion angle, abduction or internal external rotation. So we can have proprioception, just moving on that single leg, offsetting load. We can have more movement-based control stuff, and then we can start to think about unilateral limb loading as well, the toleration of that physical load.